Welcome everybody. This is our first online session with Blackboard Ultra, and we're so excited that you are joining us. So we like to start off with 3 minutes of time where you can sit and take this time for yourself. You can journal, you can draw in your journal, reflect in your journal, sit and do some deep breaths. Whatever feels comfortable for you to be able to ground and sort of settle in before we start our session. So I'm going to be on mute and everyone's on mute as well. And I'll come back in 3 minutes and we will get started. Okay? Okay, welcome back everybody. I hope you had enjoyed your 3 minutes of time. I wanted to remind everyone to be in Hakalau as we go through Terry's webinar. So make sure you can see the screen wherever you're at. And if you're in a room, if you can see the walls to the side of you and the ceiling above. If you're outside, that's awesome. You're enjoying this outside. Make sure you can see as far as possible and be in big picture view. We want to welcome Dr. Terry Lewis. She is actually in Oregon, so it's really wonderful to be able to connect from such a far place. And we're so excited to have her here. She's been a wonderful partner of our project for many, many years. And Terry and I go way back. She was actually my master's advisor at the University of Oregon when I was doing work in PBIS and special education. And throughout the years, she's been a dear friend and mentor to me, and I'm so excited to continue working with her. It really is something that's come full circle. Today she's going to talk about some highlights of PBIS which is positive behavior interventions and support. She's going to talk about an overview, mention some of the challenges that there are to PBIS, some critical features of it, and then talk about it in terms of school-wide PBIS, which is systems-wide, as well as classroom-wide PBIS. And we want to mention that just because maybe your school might not be on board on this time, you can always do PBIS in your own classroom or work setting, wherever you are. And really pay attention to elements that you can pull from this presentation and try to implement. So, you know, we always like to say, pick one or two things that work for you and try to do that. So don't worry so much about figuring everything out at one time. And then the last thing she's going to talk about is implementation. She's going to be talking for about 40 or so minutes, and then we're actually going to break out into small groups and have some discussion, and then come back and have a large group discussion. So that's sort of the format. I wanted to go over very quickly some of the features. On the bottom right of your screen, you will see a purple tab, which is a collaborate panel. And I see most of you have been chatting. So if you want to just practice chatting again, say hi, everybody. Hello. And then, of course, mute and unmute, and we're able to control that as well. Can you just start with some background and a little bit about your experience, Terry?
Yeah, it's so nice to be, able to continue to work with you guys. As Naomi said, she and I go way back, and I've had the privilege of being able to come to Hawaii and work with the schools there for many, many years, and kind of feel like it's my second sort of home. So I love getting to continue to work with you guys and support you and all just like the incredible, amazing things that you guys do there. So for me, I started my career working with kids who had significant behavior challenges and became really frustrated with feeling like we'd make some progress and then we'd slip back, like we'd get one step forward and always felt like we went two steps back. And I was super fortunate enough when I moved home to my home state, which is Oregon, to have somebody introduce me to George Sagai, and he started talking to me about PBIS and this, that if really we want to do a good job at supporting all of our students and all of our family and even all of our staff, we have to do a better job at that, sort of that foundational piece, that school climate, that school culture, how it feels for us as staff and families sort of when we show up. And so I was really excited about that because I was like, yes, that's the missing piece. That's what's been so frustrating is I've always felt like I've been trying to take kids who are struggling and make them fit the school as opposed to being able to say, can we build the capacity of school so they can step up and sort of wrap around support around the student, the child. So I sort of I connected with George in the late, mid-90s, like early to mid-90s. And so I've been super fortunate to work with schools sort of around this issue of school climate. And as Naomi said, and like what fits so perfectly with your guys' culture is PBIS is really about building relationships and making those connections, those emotional connections, so then we're better able to support kids, not just academic needs, but social emotional needs. So I've been working with schools around PBIS for about 20-some years now. And I've worked with a lot of different levels, state departments. Right now I'm working for the second largest school district in Oregon, trying to figure out how to make it happen there. And so it's really fun to be able to connect the social emotional support with the academic, with culture responsive practices, with trauma informed care, and sort of see how all those pieces sort of come together for this whole kind of perspective on the child. So I don't know if you guys have questions as we go throughout, do the hand raise thing or put a comment in the chat box, because I'd much rather have us be kind of discussion even as we're going through the PowerPoint, and then get you ready sort of for that breakout discussion kind of time. PBIS, like I said, since we're talking about relationships, it's really great to sort of discuss as we go through. So much of the foundation piece is really getting staff to think about their perspective and coming to reach agreements about that perspective so that we work sort of consistently. So that said, I'm going to sort of get myself started on slides. So, as Naomi said, PBIS stands for Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. And really what we're talking about is not a practice or a curriculum. We're talking about a framework, right? Again, that perspective taking that has a lot of practices in it, but really focuses on systems that support staff, because we know if staff are supported and they're successful, they're better able to support students and family and even support each other. So our goal is on that social, emotional, those learning kind of outcomes, but we do it by kind of stepping back and building the foundation of our house. So we're going to look at systems, but we're going to take sort of a framework sort of approach. So like I said, we're going to focus on processes. We do, as we go through the training, especially we talk about it as this three-tiered kind of model. As we move up, we do talk about practices, but really it's more about helping schools determine what their needs are, what their strengths are, what practice would best fit their need, and then how to make it so that we not only do it for a little bit of time, but we do it for a long period of time. So we focus a lot on that sustainability. Right? As we know, if we're going to really change the culture of a school, it's not something we're going to do quickly, and it's not something we're going to do once. It's something that's sort of this ongoing, it just becomes part of how we do business here, how it is at our school. So it just becomes sort of embedded within that culture. We also focus on the importance of database decision making, especially when we talk about social behavior, because it does become really emotional and it often feels really personal, and we can get swayed by what happened that day or what happened 5 minutes ago, and we can lose sight of those bigger patterns, and we can even lose sight of our progress. So we use data to kind of say, again, what's going really well? Where do we need to focus our efforts? And then after we try something, did we get the gains that we were hoping for? Did we get the benefit out of that practice that we were hoping for? So it kind of grounds us and it helps us see sort of that bigger picture, not just like I said, that what happened today at lunch or what happened this morning or what happened at recess. So it keeps us sort of honest and thinking bigger sort of picture. So we talk about this triangle, and again, you can see by this picture, it has two sides. It has an academic side and it has a behavior side, right? And one of the things we know is that it's very hard to separate behavior from academics. A lot of times when our kids are struggling with their social behavior, they're also struggling academically. And a lot of times that academic is almost sort of that the precursor or what sets up the behavior issue, right? If we think about our own selves, and if we go to work and we aren't getting it, like every time our supervisor asks us to do something, we can't figure out how to do it right, or it's really difficult and it's frustrating, we kind of get in a crappy mood. We get sort of this bad attitude.
Wait,
the same things happen. Yeah. Say what? Say that again, Naomi. What? Hello? All right. I heard somebody say something, but I apologize because I couldn't hear what it was that they said. So, and Lynn, I see your comment that you used to have PBS in your school but fell apart, but that's fine. You can bring it back. You can sort of rebuild that system. So what I was saying is that this three-tiered sort of model, like I said, we know that we have to think about academics and behavior at the same time. And there's so much pressure to do well academically, but we know if students aren't supported emotionally, it's really difficult for them to focus on the academics. The other thing this triangle really shows us is that, and we know this in our hearts, we have kids who need different levels of support, behavior, and academic. What we know is if we have that strong foundation, that about 80-90% of our students do well. They do well. It doesn't mean they're perfect, but in general, they're hanging in there, And then we know we've got like 5 to 10% of our students who need a little bit of support. They get confused easily. They're not very organized. Maybe they get easily frustrated. So that's really where we say, okay, how can we grab those 10 to 15% of students and give them a little bit of support to increase their likelihood of success, and more importantly, prevent them from developing more significant kind of behavior challenges. Then the reality is we know we're going to have 1 to 5% of our students who, regardless of the strong foundation that we built, they actually need a lot of support. And the reality is they're probably going to need support the rest of their life. We know with academics that if we don't have kids reading at grade level by 3rd grade, like 75% of those students are going to be struggling readers the rest of their life. We can make progress, but it's always going to be difficult. We don't have that early intervention kind of piece, which is what I love about like the H-PEP model and the focus on that. Well, we know the same thing is true in behavior. If we don't sort of have them on success on track by 3rd grade with their social behavior and they continue to struggle with peers and with adults and they don't really feel like they fit in, we know that those kids are likely going to have issues, and those are the kids who are now at risk to drop out of school, right? And a lot of times it's not a great kind of term, but we talk about that school to prison pipeline. And so we want to get in early on and prevent that sort of sad trajectory for lots of our students. So we build this 3-tiered sort of model, this 3-tiered perspective. And yes, I agree with you, Lynn. It starts at lower elementary and it gets worse throughout the years. By the time they get to secondary, even academics or behavior, it's really difficult. Our challenges are bigger than they were early on. We also know we have a difficult job in schools. If we look at the data, we see that the students that we are teaching now are different than the students that we had 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. We know that about 20% of our students need some type of mental health support, but most of these students, like 70% of them, are not receiving that support. That's a big challenge for schools because that, again, gets layered on top of all the other kinds of initiatives and supports that we're trying to provide. We also know that students being identified as emotional behavior disordered under the special ed law has more than doubled in the last 30 years. There's a lot of reasons that sort of lead up to this. One, it may be our ability to identify, students, that we've gotten better at that. But also we know that the culture, the economy, the political climate, just how our reliance on technology and everything's in 30-second soundbite, we know that that's making it harder and harder for students to be successful. So there's a lot of stuff that accounts for this. But again, it's a challenge for our schools. We have harder kids, and a lot of times those students are being served in general education as opposed to their special education kind of classrooms. So again, we focus on this kind of preventative approach, right? We want to reduce the number of students that have problem behavior. That's really what we're sort of talking about today. Can we build that strong foundation? So again, 80-90% of our students doing well academically and socially. Then we're going to look at that tier 2, that secondary group. Can we take kids who are at risk and reduce the likelihood of those kids ending up having serious issues? Now we know we're going to have the small group of students who need support, but we have a smaller number of students who need support, and hopefully we have systems in place that support staff so we have better resources to support those kids well, the way we know that they need. So now every kid's need is being met, right, across whether they need tier 1, tier 2, kind of tier 3 supports. And that's, again, sort of we think about that 3-tiered sort of prevention sort of model that we talked about. Now, we know that the impact of the climate has much more of an impact than just on students, that it impacts our teachers as well. If we look at reasons why teachers leave the field, 30% of our teachers will leave because of discipline issues, because of classroom management issues. And it's actually, I think, higher in special ed than it is in elementary ed. But the number one reason people leave the field is behavior. One of the number one requests we get for in-service training is around classroom behavior management. What do I do with these kids? Kids that are disrespectful, right? Kids that don't seem to care. They don't seem that invested in school. And we know that even if we build that foundation and we have that very small percent of students, they account for about 50% of your time. So we end up feeling like we're not giving our attention to all of our students the way we should, because this small number of students take up about 50% of our teachers and our sort of administrator time. So it's a big challenge for us that we face. Whoops, I went too far. All right, so unfortunately, let me go back one. Unfortunately, we are sort of our knee-jerk or immediate reaction is, okay, well, if we know who those kids are, let's punish them, or let's segregate them. Let's send them to a different school. Let's use things that are more exclusionary type practice, you know. And I get that feels like it's making a difference. We know that this is the most common response nationally. But what we actually know is if we take that approach in the absence of doing all of the proactive, positive sort of, you know, climate cultural kinds of things, that we actually increase problem behaviors, aggression, vandalism, truancy, leading to dropout. So even though it kind of feels like it works for us in the immediate, what we know is long term, it actually makes the behavior harder for us and more common. So we have to kind of say, yes, we're going to respond to problem behavior. Yes, we're going to set that limit on what's appropriate and acceptable and what's inappropriate. But we have to do it in this full system of proactive to reactive, right? So this is data from some schools that we've worked with before. We have one school where we have a student, Jason, who had 87 office discipline referrals in one school year. That's about an office discipline referral every other day, right? Now, my son got one office referral in first grade. He never got another one. That's where office referrals are effective, right? My son got one. You know, I was unhappy. His teacher was disappointed. It wasn't fun for him. He said, okay, I'm never going to do that again, right? I get it now. Like, this is what you want. This is what you don't want. That's when they work well. But if you have a kid like Jason who's had 87, at some point we have to say, this doesn't seem to be preventing problem behavior. And in fact, it actually looks like it's increasing his behavior. So we have a mismatch between this consequence and the goal that we're hoping to get. Now, Jason's teacher wrote 273 referrals. Even if we take Jason out, she's still close to writing 200 referrals for her other students. This is a teacher who's probably doing the best she can, but she needs support. This is a teacher who is at risk of leaving the profession, right? Which is very sad to have put in all of that time and passion and get so beaten down that we leave the field. So we need to be able to identify not only that Jason needs support, but Jason's teacher needs support. Right. We often see that principals have a hard time getting subs, right? So we had a middle school principal said, I can't get anybody to come to my school because they think it's so disruptive and unsafe. So she'd call and say, hey, I'm looking for a sub. And they'd say, oh, okay, what school? And when she would say the school name, they'd say, oh, my gosh, I totally forgot. I have this other thing. I can't sub for you today, right? So now she was actually able to dig in and reset the culture of her school. And she went from not being able to get anyone to sub for her school to having a wait list and having people actually go through a half-day training on PBIS and her school culture, even to make it on her sub list, because it was so, they felt so supportive when they got there, right? This is actually a high school from Hawaii, right? They noticed that they had really high in-school detention fourth period. And the rule of their school was if you were tardy, the doors were locked and you had to go to the in-school detention room. Now, right, if we're using our data, all things being equal, we should have tardies kind of equal across the time of day. But they noticed this is really high rate, fourth period. And they were kind of like, well, that's kind of funny, but it allows us to look and say, well, what's happening before or after fourth period? What is it about fourth period? And what they realized was that right after fourth period was lunch, and that the in-school detention room was right next to the cafeteria. So students learned pretty quickly If I'm tardy fourth period, I go to in-school detention. I still do my classwork, right? So I'm not really getting out of work. But when the bell rings, I get to the cafeteria first. I get better food choices, and I have more time to socialize because I get to eat quickly. So instead of doing a full school-wide, oh my gosh, we have a tardy issue, they were able to come in and say, oh, you know what? We'll just have the detention room leave 5 minutes late for lunch. So then it wasn't as beneficial for students to be tardy fourth period. And so then they were able to really quickly reduce fourth period sort of tardies, fourth period detention. So then again, we think about why are schools important places for investing? Well, for a lot of our students, the school day is really the part of their life when things are predictable, when things are positive, when they're consistent, when they can kind of know what to expect. And we know that we just have this window, like that 8 to 3 o'clock kind of window. But during that time, students access positive adult models and positive peer models, right? And we know modeling is like the most powerful way to teach. So we have this wonderful opportunity to sort of say, hey, here's what it looks like when you're respectful. Here's what it feels like when you're respected. And we know that here's a time when we can really give frequent positive reinforcement to kids. You know, when we can provide them with that acknowledgement. And here's when we're not only focusing on building academic success, but social behavior success as well. Making sure kids have the social skills to be successful in school and out of school, like in the community and when they graduate and they go and they get jobs. But it's not that easy, right? And I'm kind of watching all the comments on the chat, and you guys are pulling up a lot of the things that are challenging to implementation. A lot of times when we're in school, again, there's that huge pressure on academics, right? This is our focus. We have to get through the core curriculum. We have this, state assessment coming in the spring, right? We need to sort of score well to keep our funding and to not be identified as a low-performing school. The other thing that's difficult is it's very difficult sometimes to get districts and states to invest in prevention programs. A lot of times they'll say, wow, that's a lot of money for prevention, and we don't even know if we'd ever have that issue. So maybe we're wasting money preventing something that would never even really happen. We also know, especially as schools get larger, it's difficult for us to get together as staff. It's difficult for us to find time across certified and classified. As we move into secondaries and schools get super large, it's difficult even because we're department and grade level. I know some of the elementary schools I'm working with now, they're like 600-700 students. That means we got a ton of staff, right? So it's just difficult for us to get together. And even when we do get together, a lot of times we're like, we don't know what we're supposed to do next. Where do we get training? How do we have resources? So we feel kind of like we know that there's an issue, but it's difficult to know how can we make changes? How can we, move forward? So PBIS, like I said, a lot of it's about building that relationship. So we look to the school to say, can you identify a leadership team that represents all the voices of your staff and is respected so that they're trusted? So if they say, hey, I think we should do this, the other staff who are not on the team say, okay, I trust them. We know it is critical to have that active administrator on the team. They really are the one that set the culture and the priority for the school. So we need to have them say, yes, our culture, our climate is important, and we're going to commit resources and time to make sure that it makes a difference. We also need to break away and make sure that we're focusing on climate as a high priority. It's not on the list of 15 things. It's one of the top things that we're going to do. And we need to, as a staff, agree that we're going to change our philosophy towards discipline, and we're going to say we're going to focus on a proactive approach. We're going to invest as much time as we can to prevent as opposed to waiting until problem behaviors happen and reacting. We're going to use the data to help us know what's going well and where do we need to dig in, where are our challenges. And we're going to say, you know what, we're not going to have one size fits all. We're going to have a continuum of support. What do we do for most? What do we do for a small number of kids? And what do we do for that really small number of kids that need intense support? And that we're going to have to invest some time. It takes schools about 3 to 5 years to build that full continuum of support. We're going to rely on what has worked other places. So we're going to use research-validated practices, right? But we're going to embed those in that system to support that implementation, to make sure that those research-validated practices have a chance. So we kind of say, you know, we talked about this data. We need data to guide us, right? Data to say our strengths, our needs, how our efforts are paying off, right? They're going to help us identify those practices, right? Those, what do we need to do? We have a lot of those out there. We know from the research what works and doesn't work. What we often don't focus on is, okay, we know it works, but how do we get it to happen? That's where the systems come into play. The systems are there to support the staff so they can implement the practices that support the students. So we have to do some of all of these. Each one is important. None alone are sufficient to sort of make a difference. So we need all three of them to really, really sort of improve the climate of our school. All right, so here is a graph. This is what we often see. If we have schools implementing PBIS with fidelity, actually doing what they said they were going to do, implementing those critical features that we really looked at, we see a reduction in office discipline referrals, right? So this is a school that before they started, they had about 2,600 office referrals. This is a middle school, so they had a lot of major office referrals. 2,600 is a lot. They had about 550 students. Just in that first year, they cut it by about 1,000, right? And then you can see year after year after year, you can see it get lower and lower and lower. This school is actually continuing to implement now, so they actually can have this graph that goes all the way out to 2016, 2017. What you see is they get this little up and down, but you get this definite decrease. What you also notice is behavior never goes to zero. We have new staff, new students, changes every year, right? Students are going to make errors here and there. And we know that we're always going to have that group of students in the 10 to 15 that need a little bit of support. And we're always going to have those Jasons, that 1 to 5% of students who are going to need intense support. So we never expect problem behavior office discipline referrals to go to zero, but we would rather have a few hundred versus 2,600. We can oftentimes we can look at these and we can think about every office referral as being sorry, I didn't mean to click that fast, as being equivalent to lost instructional minutes. So we had a couple of our projects track how long, if a student was sent to the office for an office discipline referral, how long were they out of the classroom? And the average length was about 45 minutes. So every office discipline referral you can look at as 45 minutes of lost instruction. Now the nice thing is if you drop from 2,600 to 300, you can also look at regained instructional minutes. And again, if we know kids who are struggling academically are also struggling behaviorally, we want to make sure that we're not sending that kid in a downward spiral. You struggle academically, we're going to send you out of the office. The more you're sent to the office, the farther behind you struggle academically, the more likely it is you're going to have future behavior issues. So again, we want to think academic and behavior. So like I said, PBIS is a framework, not a curriculum. So we look at systems, we look at data, we look at practices. But each school has to sort of figure out what does that mean for them. So it's, like I said, it's not a specific practice or curriculum. It's a general approach. It's a philosophical approach to how we do business. Where we start is school-wide, right? We're going to build the foundation first. When you build a house, you don't start putting the wallpaper up first, right? You lay that foundation. School-wide and classroom, that's the foundation for PBIS. So we start with that staff buy-in, that staff agreement, consistency. What's our common purpose and approach to discipline? We as a staff agree that we're going to be consistent, that we're going to take a similar sort of philosophical approach. We're going to operate as a team. Doesn't mean my classroom that I don't get to have a say and I don't get to be an individual, but it means my classroom isn't going to feel like a separate house from every other classroom. It's going to feel like a different room inside that house, right? We're going to feel like one family, one sort of set group. Because from our kids' perspective, they interact with multiple adults across a day. So we want it to feel consistent to them. We want it to feel familiar. No matter where they are, they kind of know what the expectations are. Then we have schools set about 3 to 5 things that they value: respect, integrity. You know, whatever it is they say, these 3 to 5 things really capture how we want our culture to be, what we think is important for our students to learn. Then we say we're not just going to assume that every kid understands respect or responsibility the same way, every family views it the same way. We're going to say, while we're at school, this is what it means to be respectful. This is what it means to, you know, have perseverance or be hardworking or be kind, whatever those values are. So we're going to actually define them, and we're going to teach those expected behaviors. Then we're going to let kids know when we see it. We're going to encourage them and say, wow, I really like the way you did that. That is being so kind. You know when you do that, you're being super respectful. Thank you so much. We also know that students are going to make errors. They'll make little errors. They'll make big errors. Now we're going to take an instructional approach, and we're going to come up with procedures that discourage the problem behavior, but do it in a way to increase the likelihood that we'll see the appropriate behavior. So here's our opportunity to help make it clear, this is what we expect, this is what we don't expect, right? What's appropriate, what's inappropriate. And we're going to use that data to sort of hold us honest and help us see sort of the big picture, you know, so that we're not just focused on what happened today. We move this into classrooms, and here's where a teacher gets to kind of say, okay, here's what we've agreed on school-wide. Let's talk about what it means in my classroom. I actually used to do this when I taught at the university. I would say, let's talk about what it means to be respectful and responsible while we're in class together, right? It's going to make it so much more fun if we agree upon that, you know, because everybody's going to be successful. Then we teach a lot of classroom routines. You know, attention, how do I get attention? How do I get assistance? How do I line up? You know, all those kind of routine. And we make sure that students get practice. We increase the ratio of positives to negatives, right? So we want to see about 6 to 8 positives to every negative. Partly we know from research what we attend to, whether it's appropriate or inappropriate behavior, that's what we're going to see more of. So we're going to really hedge our bet and say, yes, we know we have to attend to problem behavior, but let's make sure we're attending to the appropriate behavior way more often, 6 times, 8 times to 1. We're going to use our proximity, our movement, right, around the room. So we're going to do active supervision, because we know if we are walking through the environment, we are more accessible to students and we're more likely to see what's happening. Then we're going to say, what are we going to do for those minor infrequent behaviors? We want to increase teachers' ability to manage behavior in their classroom. That's going to give them respect, right? We don't want the kids to know that the teacher really does it. They don't have to listen to their teacher. They only have to listen to the administrator. So we give teachers skills so that they can prevent, but then also respond to minor behaviors. Then if we know we've got a high-risk time, let's pre-correct for those. If we know we're going to have an assembly and everybody's going to be super excited, or we have a field day, we can, before we go in there, say, okay, this is going to be really fun, but what's one way we can be respectful during an assembly? And get kids to kind of get their head in what it's going to be like when they're there, right? This is different. We're going to go on a bus. We're going to go on a field trip. How can we make sure that we're safe? At that point, we say, okay, we've got school-wide, classroom. Oh, I lied. So then I'm going to keep on classroom one little bit more. We also know in classroom, we have to have good instruction as well, right? We can't just focus on quiet hands without having something that keeps kids involved in action and active, right? So we want kids to be actively engaged. When I taught behavior management at the university, students would ask me all the time, what's your favorite behavior management? What's the best behavior management strategy we can do? And I would tell them, teach well. If your kids are successful academically, that will reduce so much of the problem behavior that we have. It's when kids become frustrated and disengaged and disenchanted, they don't feel like they're a part of it academically, that's when the frustration leads to behavior issues. So we want kids to be successful academically, then we can focus on social success. But, like I said, we need to have both of those in place to be successful. We also know in schools there are places other than classrooms. We have the front office, we have entering and exiting the school, we have recess, we have bathrooms, we have cafeteria. These are kind of different settings. So then we say, respect in the classroom looks a little different than respect at recess or respect in the bathroom. So we say, here's how it looks different. And at one point, we're going to sort of talk about a matrix, which is really how we use that behavior matrix to say, let's talk about how this one skill can be adapted to all these different places that we go during the day, all these different environments that we go to. Again, we're going to use that pre-correction as we go to the cafeteria, as we go to recess. We're going to focus on positive reinforcement, and we're going to work with the staff that supervise in that area so they understand how to use active supervision, so they understand how to be positive 6-to-1, 8-to-1. All right. The last piece, once we've done all that foundation piece, then we know we have to increase the support that we provide to those students who need additional academic and behavior support. So if you think about that triangle, that green, yellow, red triangle that we talked about earlier, the green actually goes all the way up. So the whole triangle is green. When we get to individual students, then what we do is we say, in addition to what they're getting at that foundational level, we layer on additional supports, that yellow part of the triangle. What are some additional, small, easy, efficient things we can do to help increase the predictability, to help give, increased feedback to those students? Then when that's not successful, we layer on a third layer, that little part that's red. So those students are benefiting from the combined Tier 1, Tier 2, now Tier 3 support, right? So all of this is additional support. At this point, we start looking at student needs, and we sort of in a sciencey way, we talk about that as function-based. It really just says, why is the student having such a hard time? It's a way for us to put ourselves in that student's perspective and say, why are they struggling? Oh, they need more adult attention than most students, or they need a way to escape difficult tasks so that they don't fail academically. So we look at that need, and we tailor all of our support to meet that need. I understand work is hard for you. Instead of being disruptive, let's work on another way that you can say, this work is too hard, I need a break, I need help, I need an easier assignment. So we really focus on the individual. But like I said, we only want to have to do that for about 1 to 5% of the students in our classroom. What we know is even though that this takes time, and even though it takes a lot of agreement and work and sort of conversations on the staff, that if we build that foundation, we not only reduce problem behavior, but we increase academic performance, we'll increase attendance, there will be an improved perception of safety in the school, an improved organizational efficiency. Staff are supported. That's the system that supports staff. It's easier for them to do their jobs. That means we have less staff turnover. They want to stay there, right? You get better candidates because they hear how awesome your school is and they want to work there. We have an increased perception of teacher efficacy, right? Because they're supported and they can actually use the skills they have. And it's not on here, but what we're actually seeing is that schools that do well at PBIS increase their culturally responsive practices, their culturally relevant sort of foundations, and they're actually starting to provide really good trauma-informed care. Again, if we think about this as culture, as relationship building, that sort of says we're also doing culture responsive and trauma-informed care at the same time. So there's a lot of benefits in addition to just reducing the problem behavior to sort of building this kind of a culture. So in general, We talked about building that team, that respected leadership team, right? Again, that has status, that has a voice, so it is ownership of all staff. You say everybody is on board, we get staff buy-in, we agree that we're going to operate together as a team. We're going to use our data to say, what do we need to do this year? And I've seen some of the comments people are talking about, yes, keep it simple. We're not going to do everything in that first year. We're not going to do everything in the first 6 months. So we're going to have an action plan that says, where are we going to start? Let's build it slowly so that it sustains, right? Let's make sure staff have support so it's implemented the right way, implemented with fidelity. And then let's monitor ongoing to see, is it working? How are we doing? What are we going to do next? So this is kind of our roadmap. We get agreement, we get ownership, and we say, here's what we're going to do, right? So when we think about it, it has all of these kind of components. We're going to make database decision making, right? We're going to use universal screening so we can say, let's quickly identify what students need a little bit of support, what students need a lot of support. We're going to continue to monitor. We're not going to just check in September and then wait till June and say, how did it go? We're going to look every month or so to say, are we on track? What are we missing? Part of that is going to be making sure staff implement it well so that we make sure we support for them. We know that we're going to build this continuum, so we remind our staff early on. Right now we're building our foundation. Yes, we know we still have Jason. We're going to continue to do what we're doing now, right? But it's going to take us about 3 to 5 years to really do well across Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Part of that time is that building that expertise. How do we build the capacity of our staff so they're better able to support all student, staff, and family needs? And it has to be a team-based approach. A team works with the staff. It can't be 1 or 2 people in your school get super, super excited and they do it for everybody. That won't sustain. We all have to sort of embrace it for it to work. So schools go through this process, this exploration stage. Should we do it? These are such important conversations. Should we do this work? Are we committed to changing the culture of our school? Okay, if we're committed, let's do it thoughtfully. That's the working to do it right. Don't do it fast, do it well. Do it slow. So set up those systems at that installation. Try it out, pilot it, revise it, figure it out for that initial implementation. Once you kind of get it up and running, now we can try to make it easier. Now we can try to make it, more efficient. And now it's here where we change it because every year we have new staff, new students, things change. So it's never going to be static. It's got to be this dynamic, ongoing kind of process. But we're going to be thoughtful and we're going to be slow. We're also going to be comprehensive. What we know is to get true change, huge change, systems level change that lasts, we have to have more than just the excitement of the vision, right? We have to have all of these pieces. If we jump in and we forget to get that staff buy-in, that vision, people get confused. I'm being asked to do something, but I don't know why. Or if we give them the vision, but we don't give them the skills, people get anxious. I know what I'm supposed to do, but I don't know how I'm going to do it, right? And I'm going to fail, and I'm stressed. If we give them the vision and the skills, but we don't make it a priority, again, that administrator, people, they get gradual change. Yeah, they said we're going to do it, but we're doing 30 other things, so I'm going to wait and see how important that really is. Or if we forget the resources, they get frustrated. Why are you telling me this is important? Why did you invest time in teaching me how to do this? But now you've basically hamstringed me. I can't do it. And if we don't have that action plan, we can get sidetracked by what happened today in the cafeteria. We have to keep that bigger picture focus. So a lot of times we start with a 1-year action plan, and then we move to a 3 to 5 year action plan. All right, so big ideas. The first one, and these actually come from one of your former Kamehameha students at Kamehameha, who is a longtime faculty at University of Oregon. He gave us several messages. One is work smarter, not harder, right? We work so hard in education. We are the people who say I don't need to sleep. I don't need to eat. It's okay. You don't need to pay me. I'll work on my Saturday. I'll work in the evening. We have to switch our mindset and stop spreading ourselves so thin and say we need to be smarter about what we do. We need to accept the fact that we have limited resources and invest those wisely. Don't do a little bit on everything without showing an impact. Say, we're going to pick the things that are important and we're going to invest enough time to actually make a difference with those things. So we're going to work smarter, not harder. That does mean we're going to do less, but like I said, we're going to do that less better. We're going to say, what are the 3 to 5 things realistically we can be successful at? Now, we may take a couple initiatives that are related and pull them together to work efficiently, but we're not going to spread ourselves so thin. We're not going to have 20 different committees in our school. We're not going to have meetings every day and every night so that we're exhausted and that we never have time to get anything done. So we're going to do less and we're going to do it better, like I said, so we actually see the benefit of our efforts, right? That means we're only going to do it once. Right, so again, we're going to consolidate and integrate whenever we can, and we're going to move slowly. You know, there's kind of that phrase, we have to move slow to move fast. We need to do it the right way. So we're not going to rush for a quick fix. We're going to invest time in building that foundation and really understanding what our issues are, what our needs are, so that we only do it one time. Right? Also, that means we need to know where we want to end up, right? So we can say we want to be happy. We want all students successful. Okay, let's invest in a clear outcome. What would that look like to us? What would it feel like 3 to 5 years from now? Right? What would our data look like? Academic behavior data. How would our parents feel? What would they say? What would the students feel? So we're going to be very clear where we are going, right? What's the end of this journey? And then we're going to assess to make sure we're staying on track, right? Are we getting there? Did we slip? Did we, move over a couple lanes? Whoops, let's reset. So we're going to know where we're going, and we're going to keep ourselves focused using the data to say, how is it going? Now, once we know where we're going, now we're going to choose things that work. There are so many things that we get inundated with education. Shiny, brand new, try this, do this, somebody has a great idea. We need to step back and say, of all of those things, let's choose something that's worked somewhere else, right? Let's have a way to identify what are those research-based, evidence-based practices. If I can only invest in a few things, let's invest in something that's going to make a difference, that's been shown to make a difference. Let's not try out new things. All right, so I know that's kind of a lot. That's really sort of this big philosophical kind of perspective that's the foundational piece to PBIS. So here, and I think, Naomi, this is where we're going to break out into groups. Like I said, PBIS is all about building positive relationships. So the question is, how do you build relationships with children? How do you build relationships with family? And equally important, how do you build those relationships with your colleagues so that you're a team?
I just wanted to kind of reiterate what Terry had mentioned, that a lot of setting up in the system takes a while. It's not something that any one school in particular will have down to a science in a year's time. It takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of buy-in from just your staff support. And just kind of looking at the comments from some of you, it seems like there's just a lot of challenges there before you can even get to the core of working with the student. Mm-hmm. And I can speak on behalf of the administrator. It's not. Your administrative team has to be supportive of this.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback on that, I think, Naomi had mentioned at the beginning that when we worked in years ago, we were doing PBIS in classrooms in Hawaii, and Leah was as well. And I think it really did. I mean, obviously, it depends on staff buy-in, but there were teachers who, were definitely effectively using it in their classrooms, even if the teacher next door wasn't using it as much, or even if the director or administrators weren't, I don't know, weren't as supportive. So I guess I just want to kind of point out that if these are tools, and I know in the weeks coming up we're going to talk about making matrix, and doing things for your own classroom, that you still are able to use these tools in your own classroom, even if the idea of doing something school right now in your mind is so far off, or maybe you're thinking of your administrators and thinking, well, they wouldn't buy into this, or they're not going to support me. I think there's still hope, and for you to be able to use it in your classroom. And then I think because it is effective, and then seeing it work, then you're able to maybe get other colleagues on board, or be able to share it and talk about it. So
Definitely good point. Do what you can. One of the things is start where you are, and pick one or two things and do those things well. I think I have the breakout group set. We will see. Anyway, you will magically move, or you will magically stay wherever. So you guys don't have to do anything. I'm going to bring us back in about 15 minutes. And the question again is, how do you build positive relationships? Each group will have a coach, or one group is actually going to stay with Terry. Anyway, see you on the other side. Okay, thanks everyone. I'll go first really quickly. I hope everyone had a great conversation with their team. We had some really interesting discussion about home visiting and the importance of making sure you make those connections with the families. What else? Staff get-togethers, Hawaii. Potluck is always a great thing in Hawaii. Fast Food Friday or Potluck Friday. And the Fast Food Friday is for people who don't have time to cook, which I can totally resonate with. We also talked about social media and technology as ways to connect. So Brightwheel, which is new for me. It's a photo sharing and commenting site apparently, and Shutterfly. We also talked about staff meetings and having shared responsibility of leading those meetings so that everyone can feel a part of it. And in our team, we used to also have, in addition to that, sharing something that you're passionate about. So whether it be yoga or indigenous rights and education, whatever that was, we helped tie that into H-PEP, and that was really interesting and built relationships for us in our team. So I'm going to call on Terry's team. Can you guys share some highlights, please?
We can. We didn't really have a chance to decide who wanted to share. Does anybody have a burning desire to share out from our group?
Looks like you, Terry.
There's a hope.
Okay, I can, or Vanessa, if you want to, you can.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I'll go ahead, Terry. Thank you. I was just hoping one of the other ones might have wanted to share, because sometimes I can't remember everything was said to everybody except for what I jotted down. Okay, so I'll give it a try. Okay, so we had a good conversation about how to build a positive relationship with the children. One part was to welcome them to the classroom before they even come to school, get to know them prior to visiting. Another one was sending out information to parents so that they can communicate with teacher and with the children if they need help in whatever ways that they would need help. What else was on there about that?
One of the things I liked about the conversation with the families was that people gave lots of different examples of how they've made it okay for parents to contact them, as opposed to, so parents didn't feel like they were imposing. They kind of said, hey, you know, after 7 to 9, you can call me. Or, you know, just making it so that parents felt like they were connected, easy to sort of access them. And we talked about how hard it is because you don't just always get that FaceTime with the parent, but wanting to be available for them and trying to be sensitive to what their easiest way to communicate is. I know one person, I can't remember who, said that they would ask the parent, what's the best way for me to update you on your kid? And that they were willing to do like 3-4 different types of communication formats to match the parent's needs, which I was hugely impressed with.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.
But someone in news group.
Did you say my group, Nomi?
Yes.
Okay, I'm the one speaking for us. Please jump in if you want to. The other two ladies. So there was just 3 of us, and we talked about some of the things that Lynn was saying was that, you know, she's sure to check in with parents at drop-off and pick-up. So kind of some of the other things that other people were saying. She's sure to go to events, you know, that parents are going to be there at the school, so she's kind of there and available. And one of the other things that Venus said, who she's not a teacher in the classroom, but she is working with parents, and she just mentioned, you know, with coworkers and other people that she's talking with, is really just listening and actively listening and kind of acknowledging what that person's need is. So I think sometimes, and I experience that even in my work, is sometimes even if you're dealing with maybe a difficult situation or a challenging parent or someone that is just, you know, not maybe easy to get along with, that listening and actively listening and acknowledging kind of what they're needing from the conversation or the situation can be helpful to connect.
Thank you, Sue. How about Leah's group? I'm sorry you had audio problems. Any thoughts that came out of your session? It could be anyone from Leah's group, but you have to unmute your mic.
We had someone sharing about how where she currently and previously worked at, they really didn't encounter these types of challenges, and she hasn't encountered them in the current work environment as of yet, being that her group is so small and so young. Unfortunately, it was really hard to get everyone to share. There's a lot of echoing background, so we tried just doing the chat, but I'm not sure if anybody else wants to comment on their experience. Okay, maybe not.
Hi, this is Denise. I don't know if you can hear me now, so I'm kind of reluctant to talk.
It's better, Brittany.
Okay, well, I just think it's really important. I've always been a people person, so it's like, you know, you're not going to win everybody's hearts. You're not going to be friends with everyone in the community. I mean, you may not have, you know, some parents don't want to have a relationship with you, but that's okay. But at least you try to connect and maintain, because a lot of parents, they've been my support. They've been the pillar, you know, and they wouldn't have known how to read my mind or what the needs or the challenges may be, you know, with their particular keiki. But it's been so nice that majority of the parents are actually very supportive.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. That was such a nice list of things that everyone can do. I hope you learned some new things as well. Congratulations, everyone got on. And, you know, when the mics are on, we can hear you. So it's amazing. And the chat is going well. So thank you again. We will be posting the recording as soon as possible. It might take a couple of days, but it will definitely be recorded. and it will be posted and it will be in the Google community. Feel free to rewatch again. And yes, thank you so much to Terry for joining us. She's going to also be joining us next week, Saturday, talking about teaching expectations, which is always a great session, very helpful. And don't forget, on Wednesday, I will be posting a recorded video in the community about Tier 1 and more information about that. Just some other housekeeping things. We have our call to action, which I know some people have been confused about, but it's okay. We will get through it. The call to action are really just ways to help motivate us to take action on the things that we learned. So there are a range of things to do. You can think of it as a menu and choose the things that you want to do and focus on. So by no means do you have to do everything, but you can if you want to. And there is a Google form, again, that you will turn in on February 8th, and it asks you yes or no, did you do these things? Based on your answers, you'll get a certain amount of points. So everything on the call to action is 100 points. And just for attending today, you guys get 200 points. But there's more. I feel like an infomercial person. We're going to do a quick poll. So congratulations. You guys picked the highest one. So in addition to your 200 for joining us live, you're going to each get 300 bonus points. So you'll get 500 points for just being here. Hopefully that was helpful. Just a reminder to turn in your feedback forms for session 1. And again, just let us know if you have any questions. But thank you again. It's 11:30. Let's give Terry a virtual round of applause. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Aloha. Enjoy your weekend. Aloha.
Bye.
Aloha.